and then I'll catch you guys up on what we talked about last book club, I guess. Last book club was all about introduction. And I guess just reading through your guys' Penguins introduction, it would be the same thing. But more or less, the state of Italy at the time was it was a pretty like disjointed state, the same way that Greece was all in their like own like little city states. Uh, Italy was in the same boat, more or less. There was a couple of more dominant powers like the Kingdom of Venice and the Church at the time. There was also a lot of influence coming outside from France and from Spain, so they're always meddling in the affairs. So all of that, I guess the state of the country was probably one of the reasons that uh, encouraged Machiavelli to write this book. Another thing we talked about a little bit was whether or not this book was a, a satirical piece, a legitimate message to the Medici family, or a type of like warning for the people. For if they were to see a ruler with these types of traits, they could easily know that the ruler was not like a virtuous type of ruler in the way we understood virtue, in like this idealistic, Platonic, or Aristotelian sense, like a good thing. Um, However, interestingly enough, in the book, they flip the meaning of virtue a little bit. Virtue no longer means something like moral or some sort of an ought normative claim. It's just like uh, a type of prowess or skill, an ability, a cunning, anything along those lines. Anything that can help you progress to a goal. I think one of the translations in the Penguin was prowess at certain times. Mine says virtue, um, but it shouldn't be understood in your yeah, techne kind of, yeah. It shouldn't be understood in like the Aristotelian sense of virtue. Um, that's like a little misleading thing that sometimes people skip over. We also talked about like republics are mentioned a lot versus monarchies versus hereditary principalities, and a republic at the time wasn't the republic we understand nowadays or anything close to like what Plato had in mind. It was like a combination of three things. A ruling family or a monarchy would be one part of the pie, one piece of the pie, then the other one would be like an aristocratic piece of the pie, and then there would be like a religious piece of that pie as well. And I guess those were some of the brief things we went over. What's interesting about Machiavelli is that up until that point, all the major works talking about an ideal city state, things like the Republic or Augustine's City of God or Cicero's De Republica, any of the major works about creating this ideal state were centered around what would be just, what would be a good ruler. Machiavelli flipped all of that on his head. He started to look at figures like Borgias, right? Not for what they would say, but more so for the actions and the actions that led them into certain positions of power. So I guess that's kind of where we left off last um, last book club, and then I'll ramble on for like 2 seconds for the recording about going like chapter through chapter about how it kind of starts off. So the book starts off with a dedication letter to the Medici family. At this point in time, let me bring up the little let me bring up the little chronological thing, the chronology. So the dude is born more or less wealthy family. They're not like super rich. They're not super poor. They're getting by just fine. He makes his way into like the political sphere and he's voted second chancellor. Um, and then once he gets voted like second chancellor, chancery or whatever it's called, he gets on good terms with people like Maximilian, with people like King Louis. He goes on like diplomatic missions, so he starts to like earn a bit of a rank at this point in time. Then he gets exiled as the kingdom of Florence is overthrown by the who overthrows that kingdom at the time. A second, I'm still looking through my notes. The Soderini. They overthrow the Medicis, and then poor old Machiavelli gets exiled and then is tortured and all that stuff. But then the actual book starts off with a uh, a little, hey Medicis, now that you're back in power, remember me? Like, I might be kind of helpful to you guys. Like, I know a thing or two. I've been around the block. Um, and it's hard here to say whether or not this is like a genuine attempt of him getting a position in power, or if it's just like I said before, like some sort of like warning to the people or a weird like stylistic thing. Hard to say. Then chapter one starts off with the different types of principalities. On one hand, you have the hereditary ones, the ones that go from like father to son and so on. And he thinks that those are a lot easier to hold on to because you have the family name backing you. Then you have new principalities, ones that kind of arise from either the family being killed, a republic forming, disjunctive like states or battles or whatever. Uh, and then he makes a couple claims there saying that a hereditary prince can maintain power unless extraordinary circumstances arise, right? And it's at that point when a good prince will differentiate himself from a bad prince, because a bad prince knows, or a bad prince won't know how to navigate uh, these weird extraneous circumstances like an attack from a foreign kingdom or political strife, etc., etc. Then he gives an example of like the Duke of Ferrara, who maintained his position despite a bunch of powerful neighboring states at the time, and because he was a good prince, he was able to hang on to this hereditary claim. Then he gives an example or talks a little bit about newly acquired territories, which are very, very challenging to govern. So, like, let's say you want to expand your empire, you want to expand your kingdom, you go, you take over like a colony, a city state, what have you. And the difficulty here he was highlighting was that they have different customs and oftentimes different languages. And if you try and change up the language or change up customs, if you do either of those things, then you're going to lose popularity with the people. And then he gives an example of Louis the Seventh of France, who failed his whole conquest of Italy because he couldn't get like royalty from either like allies or the people within Italy, mostly because of this difference of customs and difference in languages. Uh, Chapter four, then he goes on, gives an example about Alexander the Great's successors. Right, he conquered a ton of different places, I guess, and they were very easy for him to, well, not very easy, but they were easier for him to maintain because of their centralization. It wasn't a type of like lordship, right, where each plot of land is dedicated to one person. No, it was like a very like one person was ruling, maybe a few people around him, and then that was it. They had like complete power that way. And then chapter five, he talks about keeping if possible, to keep the laws within a conquered state, or to completely destroy the conquered state, or to set up a puppet government, like a type of proxy government. And then he gives the example of Rome and Carthage. Uh, and like little anecdote, I think it was during this exact time that Augustine was on his deathbed in Carthage, as Rome was pillaging it, as Rome was like shooting. One of his like last notes was like, "I see the arrows coming down." So I was like, pretty cool, like thing that I thought of, whatever. Chapter 6, new principalities acquired through one's own arms and virtue. He thinks that coming into power through virtue or through cunning or through skill or through this type of technique, like you mentioned, you're more likely to succeed than just relying on fortune. Kind of obvious. A lot of the statements he's making in that first half of this book are pretty like self-evident. But then I guess chapter 7 is where it gets like a little more interesting because he focuses a little bit on Borgia. So Cesare Borgia, this dude, he was able to take charge of a state because he killed the entirety of a family in power, right? So he didn't leave any like loose ends there. The violence he did was very. It was only at the beginning. He only did what needed to be done, right? He didn't have this type of excessive violence because Machiavelli thinks that excessive violence is going to lose you popularity with people. He thinks that if you only do really, really violent things one time at the very, very beginning of like a change of power, people will kind of come to forget it, and then things will pan out, whatever. Uh, and then gives two ways a prince can come into power. One way through nobility, that one's a little more tricky, and then one way through common people. And usually, when you align yourself with people, it's easier or less difficult because they're less bold than the noble class. They have less demands than the noble class. And then the noble class are often seen, or Machiavelli at least thinks that the nobility is a lot more complicated or a lot more tricky to deal with or to gain favor for than the common people. And then he talks about how you should like fortify your kingdom so that you're not laid under siege. And then he gives the example of like all the German city states, which were very well stocked. They had big walls, so sieges weren't really like a big worry for them. And he mentions this because Italy was a very, very weak military power at the time, especially compared to like the neighboring people. Um, So they were very, very weak at the time. And for that reason, he thought that military power or military like ideas, foundations were very, very important. And then about there, I think that's where it cuts off from like the types of principalities, you stuff like ways you can get into power, and then the second half of the book is more so uh, how to maintain the power, how you should act, how you should behave. I think the second half is a little more interesting. I guess the final small note would be that religious states. So there's like hereditary states, republic states, and these religious states. They were like unique. They should be treated a little bit differently, and I think that's about where I left off. And I'm just now noticing that all of you guys are frozen, and I've likely been talking to myself.
No, I hear you.
Okay, well,
You can listen.
Henry and Lil are frozen.
I'm frozen, but I'm.
Gotcha.
It reminded me of like halfway through book 7, like until book 9 of the Republic, like where Plato just goes through all the different forms of government and like both the types of people that those governments bring about, and also like how those governments are structured and kind of like what their faults are. At least, like, you know, when he does the whole thing in like book 9, where he's like, for every thing that exists, there's a flaw that can destroy it, and then he's like, well, that's why the soul's immortal. And then he's also like, that's why uh, you know, like tyrannies turn into democracies, or you know, democracies turn into tyrannies, turn into democracies, like whatever. Um, I don't know. So like that was kind of interesting to me, because it just seems like the way he's like typecasting these different types of government doesn't deal enough with like the like connections, I guess, like between the different types. Like it's like they're not, I guess, all that different. They just seem to be similar things, but just directed towards different telos. If that makes sense. Maybe I'm off, but that's kind of like what I was thinking. At least for like the last part of what you were saying, Chris.
Yeah, yeah, because I guess the aim or the telos in all of the Republican or the Republic's like what all of their like types of social structures, types of like kingdoms, it was a little bit focused on things completely opposite to like gaining power, or it's like what the result of those city states would be gaining power, but it wasn't the goal. So that the whole aim was a little bit different, I guess, in those books.
But that's why this like made me storm at so many different points, because this is like the things that he's describing as good is like not in line with what I understand good to mean. Like, you know,
Yeah, and that's one super like tricky thing to watch out for with reading Machiavelli, because it's no longer uh, talking about moral things or about talking about what's good in the sense of like what
in itself. Like
should
it's not like what's itself. It's not what's
no
ought to be right. Like that was the thing that I like realized halfway through, was like, oh, this isn't like, we're not doing ideal theory anymore. Like this is like it's like how things are.
yeah, it's all about like the means. It's like if it can get you to a certain goal, then it is considered good. It's like gasoline is good insofar as it fuels a fire, right? It's not good in itself. We're not talking about that, which is a weird thing.
And like yeah. And it's like and the question isn't even asked, like, is the fire good in of itself? It's like, no, we just know that gasoline fuels it. Like that's all we have to know for this type of like, you know, like it's like observation. You know, it's like if X then Y. It's like cause and effect. It's not like how should X be or how should Y be.
Oh yeah,
It's interesting, but
his
it's not
whole
the mindset that
sorry, go for it.
like my parents are like, it's not the mindset that I'm like used to reading in either, because like I feel like I'm used to reading in a way where it's like, oh, this all sounds so lovely and nice, and now I'm like reading and I'm like, this is not lovely. I don't like how this sounds. Does not sound enjoyable to me.
Like the massacring of a family in power is good insofar as it can
Yeah,
fulfill you some sort of kingship. It's no longer
there's
the
one
complete means yet.
there's one like early on that I literally like I read and I just drew a big frowny face next to it. I want to find it. I was just like, this is not good. Um, He's like, whoever becomes the master of a city accustomed to freedom and does not destroy it may expect to be destroyed himself, because when there is a rebellion, such a city justifies itself by calling on the name of liberty and its ancient institutions, never forgotten despite the passing of time and the benefits perceived from the new ruler. And it's like, that sucks. That
It
just
does
sucks.
suck.
Like, I
Yeah.
just hate that.
Yeah, it's a bit tough to read Machiavelli because he does something totally different than the ancient Greeks, or than I guess any other philosopher at that point. And he's like he throws like the sledgehammer down. He's like, you know what, morality, get out of here. It's all about like politics and efficiency. They're no longer related. Politics is no longer tied into like being a just ruler or being a good guy.
Like it's almost like a utilitarian text, not in the sense that it's trying to like maximize the most happiness, but it's literally like what is the most useful to this person, or like what is in their best interest to do in these different situations.
Yeah, it is utilitarian in that sense. It's very like causal, very very causal. Yeah. What did you think, Henry? Are you still with us or permanently frozen over there?
And I'm here. One of the things I actually was surprised about was almost the opposite of Lil, because from just hearing of the Machiavellian archetype, in my head I was picturing this kind of bloodthirsty figure who's seeing violence in every turn he thinks is the best way. I was actually surprised at just how kind of, like you say, it's just so matter of fact. I don't think at any point I felt like Machiavelli was passing moral judgment on any of the actions of these people, only saying, did it work or did it not? And I was actually surprised at just how kind of like tame and even like, at times, as you said, he even condemns senseless violence because it doesn't benefit the people in the city and the progression towards power. So that's what I was shocked at, because I don't know. In my head, the kind of Machiavellian archetype is very different from what's actually being written so far.
Yeah, and it's like as of this point, we haven't gotten into the. We've only been talking about like the at the societal level, at the kingship level, and at the moral level, but we haven't been talking about Machiavelli at the psychological level. And a really cool thing that he does here is that he no longer focuses on what people say or even on what their intentions may be. He focuses completely on their behaviors, and he understands that everyone's wearing a mask. He understands that every prince has to wear a mask. He has to wear one mask for the people, one mask for nobility, and one mask for his allies, one mask for his enemies. And then he's constantly taking on and off these masks. But Machiavelli understands that he's like, rip that mask off. These are the things you need to do if you want to keep playing the mask game. And that's the weird psychological thing to it, which is like I think you had a good reading on it there if that's what you're taking. That he does condemn at several points reckless violence, unnecessary violence, only if it helps you stay in power. Obviously, big caveat.
My issue is like where there are allowances, it's like it irks me. Like, do you know what I mean? Because it's just like I don't like the idea of justifying violence in any attack. Like that's always how it's justified, but it's like to see it so like overtly declared, like in this sense, is like I don't know. Like it's like very like against my nature, I guess.
Oh yeah, it's very dirty, especially if we're coming right off of like Aristotelian ethics, right? It's a dirty read.
Oh my god.
It's like a naughty book.
No, it is. It's like this is like I'm gonna like I'm taking a class with the professor that I work with. He's teaching Aristotle next semester, so like of course I'm taking it because like that's all I've been doing with him for the last like 2 years. Um, and this is my naughty book. Like I'm gonna go into it and he's gonna be like, "What did you read over break?" And I'm gonna be like, "Well, I finished the Republic finally, and I also read Machiavelli." He's like, "Why the fuck would you do that? Like we're about to just do like the Machiavelli ethics for the next 2 months." And I was like, "Yeah, my
Yeah,
bad."
yeah, no, that'll have to be like you're gonna have to permanently like sharpie it in your brain that Machiavelli is not talking about virtue or morality anymore. He split that stuff in half. It's all about like practicality, efficiency, ends, etc. You guys all froze for me. I'm just hanging out by myself. I have great internet here.
I can hear you. What you're? Can you hear? Can you still hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yours frozen.
Okay. Um. Well, what did you guys think about the the reason he's writing the book then? What's your kind of take so far on why the book is being written? Because why? I'll open it first, then I'll.
I
You can answer
describe
first.
this as just like how to be a tyrant, and that's why I was like frustrated with it at first. It was just like that, like being this type of person is not something that interests me. So it's just like I don't love reading about it, or I didn't at first, but now it's like it's kind of fun to put yourself in that perverse mindset where you can like understand better like why people do things, I guess. Um, but yeah, like I just took this as like DIY, like how to maintain power, how to be a tyrant, like uh, if that's what you're seeking, this is what you should do, and like this is what you shouldn't do. Because he lays out like the mistakes. I feel like that's what he emphasizes a lot in the first part of the book is like the mistakes that rulers make when they take power, and like how those transitions get muddled because of like different personalities. And so it just seems to be like how to not muddle transitions to power.
I think a more subtle or like palatable reading of the book, if it's eking you out a tiny bit, or if it's eking anyone reading it a bit, would be to read it as if it were a type of like warning guide or like warning handbook to the people. So if they start seeing certain patterns that are talked about in the book of how a prince can come into power, then they can, with some degree of certainty, understand that prince is operating under like Machiavellian ethics, in air quotes. Um, so in that way, you can maintain your sense of goodness and like separate yourself a tiny bit. But it also is fun to put yourself in the shoes of an absolute dick ruler. What did you think,
Um,
Henry?
I mean, I thought what was interesting, at least from kind of take, was I do think he's writing it for a position. I do think the purpose of writing it was to like gain favor and show how good he was. Because I don't know, it felt like there were like subtle hints at his own like merit throughout the entire thing. Let me find one that I found. 12. Like on page 12 in the Penguin book, he kind of talks about the fact that other statesmen, he calls them pundits. Like he likes the subtle jabs towards like other statesmen of the time, or later on he talks about the fact that he was in a meeting with what's the guy's name, the Bourget or whatever.
Borgias.
Um, I think, yeah. He talks about like being in a meeting. Like he discussed this matter with on page 15. He talks about discussing the matter in Nantes with the Cardinal of Rouen when Bourget was invading whatever. So he kind of like I don't know. I kind of noticed small things where he's kind of like saying, "Oh, look what I've done. I've been here. I've got experience." In his letter, he talks about how sad his life is, like, and how like meaningless it is at the start. So I thought that was my kind of take. Was he is writing
I
to
got you.
gain a position? He is writing to encourage, show his own like merit and like show how useful he could be. Especially because he sent it like specifically to, at least that's what my instruction was talking about, to the guy in power. So yeah.
Yeah, I think at the very end of the book, I found a passage where he seems to be very genuine in this attempt that he talked about at the very, very beginning. He's like, let's see if I can find it. Oh yeah, he speaks about your illustrious house, all capital, all in all caps. So just like at the very, very beginning, he's talking very highly of this Medici family. So it wasn't just the beginning, but also to finish up his book, which I think puts a little more emphasis on how serious he was in regaining a position in this Medici house. Because I think to some extent he probably did think that the Medicis, if under proper guidance, could have seized power of Italy at the time. Um, and I think he even tried to. He failed in this attempt, but he tried to like garner troops or like start some sort of like mercenary group, which he talks down upon. He doesn't like mercenaries because he doesn't think they're very loyal. But I think at one point he managed to gather like 300, a garrison of 300 troops to if I forget, no, I forget, but something along those lines. And then he ended up failing, obviously. But yeah, it's hard to say how honest he was, the Medici's. And also, what's tricky though is like reading up on his biography or how he actually was. He was someone who was known to be uh, relatively relatively good in the sense that like in the way like an Aristotelian good, like a relatively good guy. Like he would be honest. He wouldn't lie very often. He would do his work well. He'd care for people. Yeah, maybe he was a little bit of a dick to the women and stuff, but that's kind of, I guess, expected for anyone in in that power in that time. Um, but he never did any heinous acts that I know of, at least. He always he carried himself with like a degree of nobility, but not in like a pejorative sense. I don't know, so it's hard to say. His words speak like totally like antithetically to the type of guy he was in his day to day life.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that I don't know how. To me, that doesn't suggest that he's not being honest in his account because he can still because it's almost a very historical and factual account of what he sees as power. Like again, I don't think that he can be a good guy and still say this is the way things are, and still say this is the way that they kind of this is the way that because he's just speaking of like this is what happened in history. This is how we should apply it to today. If you want to take power, this is how you have.
You're right. You're right.
Like it's very matter of fact. There's nothing like
I just don't like the way that he describes it. You have to do it. Like, I just think I disagree. That's how it has to be done. But like, I also just I'm inclined towards ideal theory. So it's like, it doesn't have to be that way. It could be this like other, better, like peaceful, like perfect way.
Yeah.
So like, I'm fully on board with like this is like it's matter of fact, like this is how things are, and this is how you should operate within the way that things are. But like, I just wish that there was a discussion of why things are the way they are. like I wish we had some like causal like analysis or like explanation or interpretation. Like I don't know.
I think there's whiffs of normativity in the discourses on Levy, but this book is completely. I would be I would be pressed, or I'd be very like interested to see if you could find any normative statements, like including the context in this book. Like
Well, that's the thing. Is like
I'd
it's
be
like there's nothing. Yeah, there's nothing overt that's like this is the way things should be, which is like I fully am on board with like, what Henry was saying because of that. Where it's like, yeah, obviously, like it's not like saying like this is good that things are this way. It's just saying like this is how you have to maneuver yourself to given that things are this way. But it also is like I feel like the way that it's described doesn't necessarily make things better. So like, there are some statements that are like this option is comparatively better than like this option, or like when he talks about like whatever, like the ruler that has like taken power, he uses despoil a lot. I had to look up that word. But yeah, like when he talks about like good rulers versus like bad rulers and like how they act. Like I'm looking at pages like around pages like 30. And like those who come to power by like crimes and stuff. There's no really like prevention. There's no like how do we make things not this way, or like how do we prevent someone from taking power in this way. It's more so just like this is what happens when someone takes power in this way. And so like I definitely don't read it as like being normative because you're right, there's not a lot of normative statements in this book. But like the matter of fact observation and then the prescriptive, like this is what you should do, makes it seem normative even if it's not.
Yeah, and I think that's why like reading this book unguided or not introduced to any like if you don't understand, for example, the difference between the prescriptive and normative statement, you're gonna misread the book completely, or at least misunderstand Machiavelli completely. But yeah, it's like almost as if like every statement about better, worse, greater, like poorer, anything like that, there needs to be like a little asterisk being like, remember the descriptive statement.
Yeah, like it's like those things literally are relative to each other. Like it's not relative to the good itself. Like they are literally like the relation is like confined between those two things. It's not like there's no broader question of like goodness in itself.
I mean, maybe that's almost the point. Because if you think about I mean, like he's writing to show that he knows what's best, right? So he's not going to then kind of go cause doubt on that by saying, you should kill these people. However, if you think about it morally, really the right thing to do. There's no point in writing about that because he's just trying to prove to this person, this is what you should do. I'm giving you this advice. It's the best advice. Don't think about it another way. This is it. In that kind of way, and going against that, and bringing in morality into it would just dampen that kind of message and confidence in him almost.
I also just wonder because like a lot of the book talks about how like rebellion is bad. Basically, like any like questioning of the state is like immediately the state should be in like crisis mode, right? Um, or like not of the state. I say the state, but I mean of the ruler, right? Um, and like that to me is also like I guess I kind of take issue with like Plato's version of this too, where it's like no, I kind of think that citizens should like criticize or like have disagreements with their ruler, with their government. Like that actually I think is like indicative of a healthy society and not of one that's like in trouble. But again, I also do ideal theory and like just tend towards that and like really prefer that. So I don't know. So it's like I think that you're right in like some ways where it's like that might take some of the bite out of like the forcefulness of what he's saying if he were to be like, well, it's actually not good in and of itself. It's only good under these circumstances. Um, but it's just like I feel like it's like he's like begging the question.
Yeah, like the question for me being, why should we even care about ideal theories if we don't live in the ideal world? We're not in the world of forms or anything. Why should we even like concern ourselves with it? Let's concern ourselves with practice. Oh my God. I just realized I was speaking with my mic off. Um, yeah, no. I think like the question that's being begged, I guess, is why should we concern ourselves with ideals if we live in the material world? We don't live in this world of forms or anything like that. We live in the real world, that are governed by the type of leaders that he's talking about at this time. Why should we concern ourselves with an ideal society? It's like it should be more so the other way around, where we keep in mind what can be ideal, but work with what is tangible, real, and happening right now. And I don't have a good answer for that because I also like to work in the world of ideals, in the world of forms. That's it.
Something to drink. Water. Nothing at all.
Okay, Nago.
Okay.
Um, yeah, I wouldn't be able to answer the question as to why focus on the ideals if they don't exist. Because we can get close to them? Is that the answer?
Yeah, I mean, surely it's if there's no ideal, there's nothing to strive towards. Like you've got to have an ideal of something, because otherwise you've got no goal in mind. It's even though it's unattainable, it's necessary, because otherwise you're just you've got nothing to look for, nothing to strive for. Even though perfection is impossible, you still look towards it, because otherwise you've got no direction.
What should come first, though, the ideal or the material? Because they can work in tandem, right? You can have this like goal-oriented ideal, right? We're looking to the future and hoping to build a perfect society, but we are working in the real world with all of the issues that this guy, well, maybe not the issues, but all of the instances, that any type of kingdom or society faces. Why not work in the world of what is and not ought?
Well, that's where I'm like, that's where I really see like the argument, like where I'm like, yeah, that it's probably true that like if power is transitioning, the person that is like exiting is not okay with the transition, right? Like, is not like does not want to lose power. Like, I think it's like fine to like assume that. So then that's where like ideal theory gets tricky because it's like in ideal, like the transition of power would be something like a democratic transition, like where it's like the ruler is like exiting, it's condoned by the people, the new ruler is coming in, like where there's like a peaceful transition of power. And I guess this is interesting that it isn't like that, or like it takes that is just like not the circumstances under which we're like operating and like thinking.
Yeah, it's like whether we like it or not, realistically speaking, practically speaking, philosophers will not become kings. People in power will always have the leg up on everyone else. Why not then operate in terms of power dynamics? If
But
obviously,
what if we educate them their whole lives and then force them?
yeah, what if we just kidnap 1,000? That doesn't require any power whatsoever, first off. But yeah, let's go ahead, kidnap 10,000 kids, and then run around in a
Well,
farm.
only the gold children. Only the gold children.
Okay.
10,000 gold children.
Yeah, I do think that's a very compelling argument, though. It's like we should work with the framework of what is, not what ought. Because if we're being really real, oh, there's fireworks have started here. If we're being very realistic. Philosophers won't ever be king, even if they wanted to institute like who was it? I think it was like the king of Syracuse. Even if you did want to institute this type of republic or ideal society, you're gonna need a lot of power, and he was overthrown in a matter of months when they tried to like bring up this real life republic. Um, and just like they even talked about the kingdom of Syracuse. I don't know if that was in the first half or the second half, but the Goratha something, I don't know, some dude who just like immediately lost power. Um, yeah, we can work in these ideals. We can try and instantiate the ideals, but it's never even gonna get close.
That's like the like Syracuse section is the one that I would like had referenced a little bit before, which is like
Yeah.
people who come to power via crime, which is like interesting and probably pertinent to the United States at least right now.
What chapter? What chapter was the Syracuse one?
In my version, it's chapter 8. Is that like all the little? Yeah, it's like chapter 8.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, he's the one that came to power through what was it? Through people or through the nobility? Well, he came from nothing basically. I guess that's the main point.
Like it was by it says that like he behaved like a criminal and then rose through the ranks of a militia to become the praetor of Syracuse. And then he decided to force himself to be prince.
I want to go. I want to go back on a thing I said. I think there is a slightly normative statement he makes, and it is that is that I don't know if it's actually completely normative, but I think one of his bigger points is that it's a lot worse. Like the biggest concern for a prince should be hatred, should be to not be hated, and I think that might have a
But like that's like I agree with that.
yeah.
Like I'm like yeah, yes, true. But it's like I don't like it should be like to not be hated by anyone. Like that statement should be qualified. It's like to be loved universally, not to not be hated by most of your subjects, but also be like hated by the family members of the subjects that you massacred in order to get power.
Yeah, he obviously explains like tiers of like best case scenario, you're hated by no one, loved by most, and then feared by a couple like of the nobles in power. Not so good of a scenario. It's like you're feared by the people, you're feared by the noble class, and you have a good grip. It's like a situation by situation thing.
And that's the thing. I think that like the latter example that you just gave, it is a much more threatening position to be in as a ruler. Like if you are, hated by both the people in power who are below you and the people, it's like I don't know. Like I think that that's a much more tumultuous and like insecure position to be in, even if you have exerted like a considerable amount of physical, like violent force, to exert yourself as the authority of that state. Like I think that that's all, like arguably one of the most dangerous situations that a ruler can be in.
Hmm. Did you guys do any secondary readings or any lectures and stuff?
Like the intro on the Penguin edition is like pretty like extensive, I've found. So like if there are sections that I'm unclear about, there's usually a corresponding section in the introduction that explains it. And so that's what I've been using. But
I love my lectures. I feel like I remember more from a lecture than from reading. To be very honest.
like who do you use? Because like my friend and I are about to start doing book club for the Bible, and we found like some Yale guy that has like a series of videos on YouTube or something where he does lectures
Is it
on the
like the
Bible.
8 or
But
like
like
11-year-old videos? But Yale?
They're old, but they're Yale.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen him. He's not bad. He did the Republic, I believe.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He did like five.
There's also some guy. There's one guy named Greg that does like videos on like the history of analytic philosophy that I've been watching.
Hmm.
Yeah.
There's a guy called Michael Sergiu. Michael something. But they're like videos from like the 70s or like the 80s, like long time ago.
Wait, send it. Is that for this book, for Machiavelli, or for Machiavelli?
Yeah, but I didn't watch it. I watched like the first 5 minutes of that. Let's see. Mike. He's like he still does video recordings of himself. And he's like 80 years old and like fat, and he's still talking away. Hilarious. Here, I found it. On Machiavelli. Here, I'll send it in. Wait, this guy died? Michael Sturg died? What?
I was watching one of his videos in the Republic. And I looked in the comment section, and one of the comments was like, "Yeah, this is so great. I'm so sad he died." I was like, "Oh shit."
Yeah, his last postings were 1 year ago. Fuck.
Wait, his name's Shiguru. That was my 5th grade teacher's last name.
Dude, it's destiny. It's fate. But yeah, no, I watch a lot of like the lectures. I like the most. I don't know why. I just remember more from hearing someone talk than from reading. What else? I was gonna ask. I had a question. I had a question for this. Let me find it. I wanted to see what you guys had to say. Okay, yeah. What's at the very end where he starts talking about ex-scholastic or basically religious city-states like the Vatican or the Papal State at the time in Italy, and why they should be treated completely differently. And if you guys have only read up to halfway of the book, I don't know if he talks about it extensively. He kind of just leaves it at word. He just says that religion is a very very strong foundation. You can't move it around the way you can move around other states. But why? What what factors make a religious state more stable than other states? Because I'm just running through my head of religious states I've known, Ottoman empires, or some of the Persian dynasties, or even a lot of the Greek city-states, which would consider themselves, religious. And they all seem to topple every now and then. But for some reason, Machiavelli's kind of like edifying them. He's like, no, these ones you can't really mess around with them. They're very, very good. What reasons make a religious state more cohesive, more resilient to crappy prince?
I think it's because you have like something that is guiding the state that is not the ruler, right? Like you have something where they're agreed upon like moral tenets that every person who's a part, like the Vatican, for example. Like no one lives in the Vatican if you're not Catholic. That would be crazy, right? So it's like, yeah, it's like this religious city state where everyone is kind of on the same page about their beliefs, and therefore, like you can have a shitty ruler who like might do things that people disagree with, but as long as he's justifying it on this like common shared belief that they have, they're bound to be less upset about it, right?
But
I mean, like you see that with Israel now, where it's like if you're justifying what you're doing on this like shared belief that people have, and like Zionism and like not in Judaism, but like in Zionism, I'll say is like the religion of Israel, but like right, like that would be why you can survive, or like you're more like okay with shitty rulers, because you all have this common thing you agree with, and also like you can like refer to the book, which like tells you how to rule. If you refer to the Bible, if you're Catholic, to be like, this is how I can justify these acts. So I think it's just like that shared commonality, and also the fact that you have an external reference in which you can point to justify your actions that isn't just your own self-interest in maintaining power, even if that's ultimately what happens.
But it seems like originally you started off with because everyone has the same moral tenets, right? So if everyone were
Well,
to
but
have the
it's like
same,
yeah, it's like everyone has the same moral tenets that are from this external source, and therefore, like shitty rulers can make themselves seem better by pointing to that and by like justifying it with this external
so
source.
external source, what would you then call something like a tradition, a custom, or types of like things like that, which he talks about as well being like a important part, but not as important as
Like I
religious.
think of like the Oracle of Delphi, for example, right? Where it's like you can basically, like in Athens, you could basically justify doing things that like the Oracle told me to,
Yeah.
and like that's kind of like okay, yeah, Oracle told you had to, right? So it's like one of those things where it's like when I say like something that's like external, it's just something that is like higher than themselves, like above themselves, or like different from themselves. That's
I think
like that like everyone is on the same page about. Even if you're like bending it or like changing it
yeah.
to fit your own motive, it like on like from the perspective of the population, it looks better, it feels better, it feels like you're still all cohesive and like in like a relatively homogenous population group.
I also think because it comes from the assumption that the ruler or the person in power at the time in any type of religious state has the most immediate and reliable connection to the divine versus anyone else. That's why you had so many states where you couldn't even look at rulers, where you don't even know anything about them because they're just so divine, untouchable. So that would be one reason. Whereas in a monarchy or any type of republic, the only thing they can appeal to is like yes to God, but they all understand that the papal state or like the Pope or people like that, they all have a more direct connection. So the next best thing they have is connecting themselves to the house name, like the Medici house name. So that seems like a bit less strong of a name than like I have Jesus on my side, man. Like don't fuck with me. Yeah, not a bad point.
But I think that's what makes them more resilient or like more capable of kind of like enduring bad rulers, is because it's like even the bad rulers uh, appeal to something that everyone agrees is good.
So
Like you know
yes,
what I mean? Like even like in Egypt, like the Arab Brotherhood, right? Like
yeah.
they're making it feel as the Quran. It's like everyone in Egypt is like, yes, the Quran is good. So it doesn't really matter what they're saying about it because they're basing it in something that is commonly understood.
So, rebuttal. That's a good point insofar as we're talking about the an isolated state, right? That still doesn't fully answer the question of how a religious state is more resilient to external threats, because that's also a really, really big thing. At the time, they didn't have.
That I didn't get. Like that I was like that it wasn't like the way that the reasoning for the first thing was kind of like implicit and like follows for me, but like that makes them less like ready to attack. Like, wouldn't it make them more? Because it's like if you hate Catholics, then it's pretty easy to go murder a bunch of Catholics if you want to take over the Vatican or something. Like
Yeah.
it's you're almost like making yourself a target.
I mean, I think that's true, but also if you've got God on your side, like if you've got people believing that they've been chosen by God to fight this battle, that's a massive incentive. And even hatred, like I know hatred towards like a group of people is powerful, but I think divine justification is more powerful than anything. And that's why I think things like the Crusades are so interesting, is because you've got two sides both thinking to God to fight each other. And I think that's where the power comes from. It's that they'll never lose their spirit. Even if things are going badly, they can still have that belief that God's on their side, so they'll win. And that's why they're the more powerful force.
Like, yeah, that would make them maybe better on the battlefield. Like, that would make them
Does
better
that
on the
make them less
battlefield.
likely to be attacked? That's my question.
Yeah, that's
Like,
what
does
I'm.
that make them less likely? Yeah, because like I understood what was asked before is like other states are less likely to provoke or like are less likely to like launch an attack, and they're more protected like in terms of other people's actions, not like that they have like a really strong army, which I'm sure they do, but it's like other people don't want to fuck with them, and I just don't really know why that would be the case. Like, is it because like in like a lot of these instances there's like overlap between like the peoples that are ruled, you know what I mean, where it's like you have like in like some of these like places you have a diverse population, so there might be like in Ukraine, for example, where it's like the justification for Russia invading is like, well, there are Russians in Ukraine who, identify as Russians and like want us to like come and liberate them, right? And so, like, is it that you're protected from those types of justifications for intervention because the population is relatively homogenous and is like happy with the rulers? Um, I don't know, but it doesn't seem like it would be less difficult, or it would be more difficult to take over just because the population is homogenous, especially if it's a small state.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but from my understanding, I think like to answer that question it needs to be city specific, right? And we know that the entirety of Italy was religious, all more or less on the same side of like that Christian sphere. So there was never, well, it would always be apprehensive to attack the religious state. For one reason, they didn't have attacks within, or as many attacks, as many like powerful attacks as much. They were more resilient because everyone was on the same page religiously within Italy. The other one would be that their only real, well, it's because yeah, at one point the French King Louis came in to support the the Vatican or like the Papal State, and the only real danger at the time, I think it was the Turks, right? The Turks are yeah the Turks at the time, and they're only fighting one enemy on one side, and if they have the help of a kingdom like France, which was a superpower, I guess maybe for those reasons they were more resilient. But I think it's a little
But
silly
that's
to.
not due to their like religion, like them being like a religious city state, right? Which is like how the original question, I guess we were talking about the context of. Like I don't know how that can be attributed to their religion, like their religiosity.
I also think that well, Machiavelli was very well read. He couldn't read Greek and proper, but I think it was Latin that he could read. So he was able to get his hands on a lot of the books and papers of like historical texts from the Romans. So
He's just
he
like
also
me.
so he understood that not everyone was on the same. Not all religious states were in the same situation that the papal state was. Yet he still decided to say that these states were more resilient in both matters of defense, in matters of being more cohesive, and in matters of like being able to deal with turnovers in power. I'm trying to think of a reason why that might be.
Do you remember what chapter this is from?
Sorry, what?
Do you remember what chapter this is from? Maybe we should go back.
I think that's chapter 11. Chapter 11 is where he first brings out the term expasticity or something like that, but it just means religious. Let's see.
So the question is, why are religious cities more resilient to attack and internal conflict and attacks? That
Yeah, internal conflicts, it seems like fair to say that it's because the ruler can point to the divine and then keep everyone in check because he has that like, thumbs up from the divine. From external threats, I'm not so sure how they can stay a state for so long or stay in, have their own kingdom for so long. Oh,
surely connections.
sorry, go for it. Well, yeah, one reason he does talk
Surely
about
like connections as well.
Sorry, say it again.
Like connections between so papal states, for example, or religious states will have connections to other religious states. So like papal states connected to France, for example. So surely that plays a significant role in its alliances as well.
Yes,
I was just rereading, and it says that like he says that the it's like the ecclesiastical prince, right? He says that they alone possess states and do not defend them, and then they have subjects and do not govern them. Like, so it's basically just like they are figureheads for the belief, like they're figureheads for the church, which is why they are resilient. At least that's how I understood that. But I still, again, that doesn't concern external forces. Yeah, it does not concern external forces. Because like, also, what if someone is like, I mean, like this was like the whole debate in like the ancients, but it's like everyone's a heresy, like everyone's a fucking heretic, or in the medieval times, it's like everyone's a heretic because no one knows what God actually wants or what God actually says, and like so it's like, what do you do if you think that if you're a neighboring city state and you think that the city state next door, like is ran by heretics and is like doing injustice to the divine, and like isn't that more incentive to attack them? Like, wouldn't the religiousness like almost be like fuel to the fire, like literally?
I just feel like being a religious state gets you a lot of strong allies. So if you can have a lot of strong allies, you're decentivized to attack. And then on top of that, I think later in the book, spoiler alert, maybe later in the book, I don't know. But he talks about how the Swiss were able to take over or defend themselves for a certain reason. And it was because all of this, the army came from the people. It wasn't a mercenary army. It wasn't an army that was like stolen. It wasn't an army that didn't really want to be there. It wasn't a forced army. It was an army of the people that wanted to fight for it. In any religious state, I would imagine that most people would willingly take up arms against a threat to their state, since, as you mentioned, Henry, they have that like God's on our side type mentality. So instead of fighting an army, you're fighting the people, and there's a lot more people. So your options are basically totally ransack and destroy the city, which would lose you out on all of the like the loot or like the good stuff you get from taking over a city.
Yeah, I think allies are a really important thing, like a really important thing. Having that kind of network of religious states, big powerhouses like France, for example, or Spain. I think that is kind of a big factor. And
Sorry, there's like a delay, but you should go if you're not done. I just like I'm sorry, the delay is really bad. I just like don't. I feel like that wouldn't that just like bring about controversy though, like religious controversy that is um, like because like I mean maybe I'm just thinking in like a different like historical context, but it seems like if you differ, like you have to be on the exact same page, like as the Vatican to like get the support of the Catholic Church. Like you can't differ at all from church doctrine, from heterodox like Catholic doctrine. So it's like it seems to me like that like would also apply in these contexts, but it also seems like there is like there's bound to be some differences that are at the very least environmental or that are like adapted in certain societies that change the way certain doctrines are interpreted. That to me mean like wouldn't that be the catalyst of conflict? Like wouldn't that be the thing that they're like, we thought you were friends, but you believe that God says this? Like fuck you, like you know what I mean? Like wouldn't that be the thing that like starts wars? Because I mean like religion started war for millennia. Like differences, even like
yeah, I can definitely see that, but I also think that when states are being set up, kind of the religion of the state is usually made in uniformity with like the traditional Catholicism for the very purpose of not being attacked and having that kind of support from them. So that's why I guess there's less difference. Because I agree. I think obviously differences in doctrine and things like that would lead to conflict. But I think states, if they were kind of smart about their allies and what they wanted, would uniform themselves with traditional religious views for that very reason.
Yeah, and then they have majority on their side completely. Like if you kind of fast forward a tiny bit, you can stamp out very very easily any type of like Protestant
like
reform if
that
you
is
have a
like how it
Catholic
changes
Church.
over time, like right? Because it's like I don't think that they like on the onset are like these are differences in doctrine, but I do think that like if you're in an insulated like religious city state, you adopt differences in doctrine that are like catalyzed by just like ways of life and like the way that you are living or like what makes the most sense, what is the most useful for like the city politically at the time, or not even politically, but like for the city's like function at the time is to like interpret different doctrines in different ways. And so it's like wouldn't there be like temporal like issues that arise after you've established like an allyship with one state if you oh my god the cat's so cute if you change it to like, or if you change that doctrine, if you change that belief to fit certain circumstances, or like it's a progression that happens over time. Like I don't know. It just like I think that would start conflict. Like, I feel like that would almost be more. It's like I thought we were on the same page. Also, what's the cat's name? I just cat sat for 2 orange cats all week, and I miss them.
Her name's Pixel. Very, very cute. I wasn't a cat person massively, but my girlfriend is. And so now I do love Pixel. She's really cute, although she doesn't like me very much, but it's fine.
She's so cute.
So what other questions did you guys have while reading this first half, if any? Any wrapping closing remarks?
Do you have like a crash course on Italian history of the time that I could like watch in like 30 minutes and like
30
understand
minutes?
all the context?
I don't know.
Do you have like a magic link you could send me?
I watched a link. It was like maybe like a 40-minute long video on military Italian history, but not political Italian history. But I guess they kind of
Okay,
go hand in hand. But
I'll survive that. Can you send that
yeah,
to
I'll send
me?
that. But basically, like absolute summary is that it was like a terrible, terrible military situation. Like no armies were very loyal. All the armies would surrender easily. Mostly mercenary armies. It was just like a really poorly militarized state. That's why like half of the book is focused on uh, how to have a good military. Italian. But yeah, this is the first time I've
Wait, send me
ever.
the link.
Yeah, I'm finding it.
Like I watch a bunch of like I like look through all my video essay accounts and like because like I'm my double major is history, and so like I have a few history dudes that I like, but none
Yeah.
of them do Italian history. Like, I'm only interested in Russian and German history. I gotta get on like the communist Italian history bullshit.
Italian history. What is this during the 1500s, 1400s? Oh no.
We'll see. The back of the Penguin edition is funny because it says, I was just reading it. I didn't read it, but I was just reading it for the dates, and it said, "The prince shocked Europe on publication with his advocacy of ruthless tactics for gaining absolute power and its abandonment of conventional morality." And it's like, no, it doesn't abandon conventional. Well, it kind of does abandon conventional morality. It just doesn't talk about it. I don't
Well,
know.
it's a super dangerous thing to publish at the time because it goes against all of the ideals of the religious states, which were the power states at the time. Like the religious states, they're all about we're doing what we're doing because it's good. We killed off those people because it was the moral thing to do, the right thing to do. They were a danger to the church. Like they use all those like normative claims to defend anything they do. So in that way, bringing in like a descriptive matter of facts thing, like oh, you want to get in power, slice off the head of the Medici family, like in that sense, it would be a little bit dangerous, and also dangerous for Machiavelli because poor guy was like poor guy was exiled and tortured, and then he's coming back. The Medici's didn't want him, and then he's like, "Okay, well, check out this book." Like they didn't hire him.
Like what methods of torture they use on him? You know.
Uh, I believe it was after the Soderini. It was isolation and like starvation stuff like that. It wasn't anything too extreme, but I could be totally wrong there. But I think it was uh isolation in those type of like small square boxes, basically. Yeah.
Although,
That's terrifying.
one thing I do think is interesting is that's a good point about the fact, how like dangerous this would have been to publish at the time, because obviously you've got the church imposing these kind of like moral values onto people during war and things like that. But maybe that's one of the reasons they stayed in power for church states stay in power for so long is because one of the things I was reading about in the introduction was it talked about how the Borgia guy, he was the son of the Pope, and the Pope was putting him in power. So there's that kind of abuse of power throughout kind of church institutions, but then expecting everyone else to kind of fit to moral kind of, these kind of like moral values, I guess. I don't know. I just think it's interesting that it's an interesting point that at the time the church was so powerful and its kind of values were so ingrained that this kind of thought wouldn't have really been commonly seen as good in the sense we're using.
Yeah. Yeah, that's argument to support the idea that it was like a warning manual, or maybe it was passed off as a warning manual. Then
Reading
if he's
it as a warning manual, I like. That's what I'm gonna go with. I'm gonna go with all the things that he says you should do are things that he's warning against.
whatever floats your boat. Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna go spend some fam jam time because Christmas holidays, etc., etc.
Have fun in the jungle. I know my dad's out to grab me. So, goodbye,
Okay.
guys. I'll see
Catch
you
you
later.
guys
Happy
in a week.
holidays, everyone.
Bye bye.
Happy holidays.